Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of A Cup of Coffee in the Neighborhood with Jennifer Richardson.
Good morning.
So today we actually got some pretty good news when it comes to economic data and everything else we just kind of wanted to share. And as always, we kind of give you an update as far as, what's going on with the market right now. And then me, of course, I'm always going to talk a little bit about just overall like home buying strategy and how you can kind of set yourself up for success in the future. And if you got any questions or, disagree with anything we said, by all means, just post it in the comments and, we can have a discussion about it and come to terms. So it should be good. But ultimately, so what's going on with the Fed? So the Fed, Jerome Powell, is making some statements, and the statements that are making are very positive, right? They're as positive as the Fed can be. Because if the Fed's like, oh yeah, 100% gonna make a freaking rate cut in September, guess what everybody's gonna go do? Boom, and then the inflation's gonna kind of go tick back up, and they're not gonna like that. So you kind of got to understand that the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, is in this just kind of impossible predicament that he's found himself in because he's like 2%, 2%, 2%. He's been riding that wave this entire, I think, almost 2 years now. And if he says anything about anything that's going to happen into the future up until they have their board meeting, which is going to be September 17th and 18th, it's going to completely detract from what they've been trying to do over the last 2 years and do this quote unquote soft landing. Which honestly, as of now, it kind of does seem like, that might actually be a possibility. I think the business owners themselves right now are just getting crushed because of the high interest rates. So I think there's going to be a lot of political pressure on them in order to make that cut in September. And I know that me and Jim have been talking about this for some time. Oh, yeah. We were hoping for May, but the data just wasn't there. But now the data is clearly showing, moving in the right direction. I don't know if we're going to get to the 2% that he's so, hawkish about, but at the end of the day, like, I feel like he's going to have to look at the data, he's going to have to look at the big picture and everything else and actually determine, hey, like, Americans are getting crushed right now, I should probably make this rate cut so that we can actually have more prosperity that we got going on right now. So like, what is your kind of thought process on, what do you think is going to happen in September?
Yeah, so here's what I'm seeing, and you're more well versed in, the market data and the financials or whatever, the economics, I guess. But from what I'm seeing and what our predictions are is that we're really seeing a lot more inventory come onto the market by way of listings. And most of the buyers that are kind of on the fence are really sort of radio silent right now. And I would say that's, the month of, June, July. And I think that part of that reason is that, it's summertime, people are busy and they travel. So in Wilmington in particular, in our area, we get several different pockets of buyers. And so some of those are relocating, some are retiring, some are vacationing. So, on occasion I'll have people that reach out to me that they're in town, they want to look at properties. That's fantastic. They're exploring the area. So that is seeing an uptick right now. But typically those people are not writing contracts right now. They're really in the information gathering stage. The other folks that I'm seeing are, we're seeing a lot of sellers that are ending leases and they're starting to put those houses on the market right now.
Because the equity's there.
The equity is there. It just makes sense. There's a little bit of economic uncertainty. So I think that some folks are trying to liquidate some of that cash and, maybe even make different moves as well. I'm starting to see some people that are willing to give up a lower interest rate on a property that they have currently to move into a property that fits their needs, and the equity makes it a wash. So, a normal kind of 6%, 6.5% rate doesn't feel as painful as it did, when we were kind of accustomed to like 3.5, 4.
Status quo.
But what I'm seeing in a nutshell are, more listings hitting the market. A few, buyers are kind of stabilizing right now. So what that's leading into is an extended days on market and fewer showings, right? And so it's all supply and demand. So what I'm telling my seller clients is it's probably going to take us a little bit longer to get your home under contract and sold. What I'm telling my buyers is it's a phenomenal time to get out there in the market and buy because you're not experiencing those multiple offers. You're seeing seller concessions, you're seeing due diligence requests, you're seeing sellers accept contingencies. It's just it's starting to balance and level out. And I think that that's good for both parties involved.
So I have no crystal ball. Nobody does, right? Everybody's just kind of figuring out. Some people are data driven, but a lot of that data, you really got to question where that data comes from and how valid is that data, and then how valid is the data collection as well, right? So like, and people don't ever actually ask those questions really anymore. They just read the headline, they're like, oh, it's this, and they just roll with it, thinking that wherever they heard it from is somehow a valid source. And that's where things are starting to get a little bit convoluted, because we have so much data, so much information at our fingertips right now, that it is so hard to figure out which information is unbiased. And it just puts you in a quagmire that you just kind of don't understand what's truth and what's not truth. So here's my crystal ball scenario going forward, and it's going to look like come September once the Fed makes a rate cut. The Fed's going to make a rate cut. Every single place is going to blast that out, and it's going to incentivize people to get back into the market, which is going to increase demand. Once demand increases, supply is obviously going to increase a little bit, because people are going to be like, oh, I can go buy the next house that I've been waiting on for 2 years because this house I have either outgrown or just no longer suits my needs, or hey, I hate my freaking HOA, or whatever the life-changing scenarios are. But people have been waiting for 2 years for this to happen because everybody's been so scared of the rates. So what I think is going to happen in September is everybody's going to jump into the game. So there's two kind of like thought processes that I have. Hop in now if that's truly is going to happen, because nothing happens fast in mortgages unless you're paying cash for a place. And if you're paying cash for a place, awesome, if that's where you think your cash is best utilized. But nothing happens quickly in mortgages. So you got to start looking back. We're already 30 or 60 days out before you could actually close on that home. Locking an interest rate, generally you lock it in like 30 days prior. But at the end of the day, that's kind of where you're at. So the second the Fed makes a rate cut in September, if you wait for that time, you're already kind of behind the power curve anyways. I'd probably honestly, recommend floating into the Fed meeting personally, but you kind of make that decision on your own. So right now you can ask for seller concessions. With those seller concessions, if you wanted to ask for them, if you do need to buy a house right now, you can ask up to 4% on VA, 6% on FHA. You can take that money, cover all of your closing costs, right? And then you just refi in a year, you know what I mean? Once the Fed makes more rate cuts, which they are predicted to do so. Or you wait till September, wait till the Fed makes a rate cut, and then you're just going to push off when you refi again, because everybody knows if you can save money on a refi, it makes sense to do it. And another thing about refis is if anybody's actually pushing you to do a refi right now prior to the rate cut, and it's not like a cash out refi in order to do debt consolidation or something else like that, I would look at that very negatively personally, because they're trying to push you into getting a deal done that does not best suit your needs. And I personally think that it's going to best suit your needs after the Fed makes a rate cut. So if you're thinking about refining and you've had that higher interest rate because you bought in the last couple of years, after that first rate cut is probably one I would recommend. And then honestly, you're probably going to do another refi a year later down the road. Because if it saves you money on your mortgage payment year over year, it makes sense to do a refi. Now, of course, if you're into debt consolidation, like you're just getting crushed by high interest credit cards or whatever else is your financial situation, then yeah, if you need to do a cash out refi because you're hurting and it's going to save you from more pain in the future, then it makes sense to do it. But anybody that's going to just try to get you to do a IRRRL or rate and term refi right now before the Fed makes a rate cut, you can call those people vultures, is what you can call them, because it's not going to behoove you and it's not going to benefit you right now to do that. It's going to benefit you to do that once the Fed makes a rate cut and interest rates truly drop a little bit. So that's just my kind of 2 cents on that as far as, the crystal ball and going into what's going down. So, I know Jen didn't talk too much this time, but, it was mostly about the Fed and the rates and everything else. But, like she's talking about, man, like it takes time. So you got to plan. And you got to plan and you got to trust the people that you work with.
For sure. And I think something that's super important too as part of that planning process is that we've seen a lot of changes in our real estate industry in particular. And so the moral of the story is you need to have an agent that you have hired to work with you as a buyer's agent. As of, I think, August the 1st, we're no longer allowed to even show a property unless we have been hired by that buyer. So these are conversations that you need to start having now, and interview your agent, make sure you're a good fit, make sure that you have a plan in place for when your dream home pops up. And what that looks like is, of course, you're meeting with a lender, you're getting pre-approved, you're interviewing your agent, you're making sure that you're a good fit with that person. There are just so many changes there. And then, from the flip side of that, from a seller's agent, you've got to make sure that your listing agent is really going above and beyond and marketing your property to stand out. I think that, we're going to see a lot of different conversations that need to be had, and that's fine. We know how to navigate those. make sure that whoever you're working with knows how to navigate those changes. But just go ahead and start getting lay the groundwork now for those future plans so you're ready to go. So when it's go time and rates are lower and you're like, okay, this makes sense for me to make a move now, you're ready to go. You've got everything else in your pocket, and all it is looking at the houses and picking the one at that point.
Yeah. And then just kind of a future salvo, probably around October timeframe, me and Jen are going to kind of sit down and have more of like an in-depth discussion about how can you utilize buying rental properties in order to lower your tax burden prior to this year's end. Because obviously like depreciation and U.S. government very much incentivizes home ownership. So if you can utilize that to your advantage, especially in a depreciation tax kind of realm, it's definitely going to behoove you, and that's just something you would have to do before December. So that's why we're going to talk about it in October. But other than that, I hope that y'all enjoyed this episode. We're probably going to have to cut it up into 2 episodes. So we'll probably post this twice next week. And I hope y'all have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you when we see you.
Have a great one.